Hi, my name's Tally Banaszak, and I'm here to share my faith journey with you. My journey has been a long and windy road full of challenges, questioning, and self-doubt. And it's also been filled with joy, grace, and love. God has blessed me with people and experiences that have positively impacted my faith and ultimately led me here to Virginia Theological Seminary. I've been an Episcopalian for as long as possible. I come from a long line of Episcopalians on my father's side. My mom's family was mostly Methodist, but when her mother married my mom's dad, he was Episcopalian, and so they decided to raise their family together in the Episcopal tradition. So both my parents, my mom and my dad, were raised in actively involved Episcopal families. My Episcopal church homes over the years have been predominantly white, located in middle to upper middle class suburban neighborhoods. Most of the youth in my parishes went to public schools where there was somewhat more diversity. My growing up and sending parishes ranked among the largest in the Diocese of Southern Virginia. I attended various Episcopal churches during my father's naval career in multiple states. I was baptized when I was 10 weeks old at a chapel on the base near Tokyo, Japan, where my parents were stationed. My earliest church memory is being about 4 years old in Children's Chapel at St. Stephen's in Oak Harbor, Washington. Older teens led the Children's Chapel, and I remember them holding up big poster boards with the words to the songs that everyone was singing. And I remember wishing that I could read so that I could sing along with them. In my family, church was not an option on Sunday mornings. We always went. Even in later high school years, when my brother and I would be out later on Saturday nights or when we would have jobs, my dad would come flying into my bedroom on Sunday mornings, exclaiming, "If you're going to hoot with the owls, you're going to soar with the eagles. It's time to get ready for church." My dad retired from active duty in Virginia Beach, so this meant no more moving every few years, and we attended Eastern Shore Chapel as a family for 10 plus years, my parents for 40 years. There, I sang in the choir, I attended Sunday school, I was an acolyte. It was also where I was confirmed and where I was married. A large influence in my life at that time was the Reverend Iris Slocum, ordained a priest in 1984 and was the first woman priest to serve in the Diocese of Southern Virginia. She led our children and youth ministries, and I looked up to her in many ways. I had never met a female priest before Iris. She was a woman glowing with God's love and a groundbreaker in the Episcopal Church and in my heart for God. When I was 14, I was invited and attended an EYC, Episcopal Youth Community retreat at Camp Chanko, and this retreat was a major turning point in my faith life. I still remember the theme of the weekend having to do with the movie The Jazz Singer, and it involved large and small group discussions, some presentations, lots of singing, a dance, and worship. On Sunday of that weekend, we received Eucharist outside on the bluff overlooking the James River with a simple but beautiful wooden cross hanging in a way that it appeared suspended in the air. The youth missioner and camp director, the Reverend Dave Davenport, officiated the service there behind a very simple wood altar, wearing regular camp-like clothes and a colorful stole. I don't remember all the specifics of the service or the homily, but at Eucharist, the group formed a circle and we passed the bread and wine one to the other. And I remember this so distinctly. I remember looking at all the faces around me, my new friends, and feeling this really strong sense of being home. For the first time, I felt the true transformative meaning of Eucharist and of Christ's love for me. And this retreat experience is when I first developed a personal relationship with God and first fell in love with the sacrament of Eucharist. Two very significant people in my faith journey entered my life at that time. A good friend from school, Shannon, invited me to that first retreat, and then she kept inviting me to youth group, to happening retreats, and she was the first person I shared my first call experience with. Recently, she was my prayer person during my Commission on Ministry interview day. She was constantly praying for me in one room of the building as I was being interviewed by 3 groups in other rooms. At the end of the long day, Shannon was in the room with me when Bishop Susan gave me my answer on postulancy. Shannon first invited me to God back in 1984, and I said yes. And she was with me hearing Bishop Susan's yes to my postulancy in October of 2021. It very much felt like a full circle. Shannon has been an evangelist to me of God's love and grace and invitation my entire life. Always there and always accepting. The Reverend Dave Davenport's also been a tremendous influence in my faith life. His impact on me spans from 14 years old to current adulthood. I had the blessing of his mentorship as a teenager through all the youth programs, and then also as adults, serving together on the Chanco Board of Directors, serving Curcio retreats, and as co-leaders for the recent campaign for Chanco. Dave exudes God's peace and love, consistently and always. He is the most calming presence of anyone I've ever known. He will tell you that I am exaggerating, but the truth of the matter is any person who has been his parishioner or his camper or counselor or youth group person would tell you the exact same thing. He simply radiates the person of Christ, and we are drawn closer to God just by being in his presence. I am thankful that God placed Shannon and Dave and so many other wonderful friends and mentors in the path of my faith life. After that first retreat, I became involved in EYC at the parish, convocation, and diocesan levels. I had the privilege of attending General Convention as a youth representative in 1985. I served on teams that planned the diocesan youth retreats and served happening. And during my senior year, I delivered my first sermon on Youth Sunday. During these middle and high school years, I had experiences of inner call that I did not recognize at that time. During my college years, I served as a camp counselor at Chanco. Those summers were some of the most spiritually formative and fun in my young adult faith life. There was something about living outdoors together and being a part of a team that had to plan all kinds of activities and work with weather and be creative and flexible and have a sense of humor to survive. There was something about singing camp songs around a bonfire and watching young campers pass a candle, lighting one to the other, watching them experience their first Eucharist outdoors, and oftentimes their first Eucharist ever, just as I had had my first outdoor Eucharist experience 5 years earlier. We were often told, and I never forgot, that we might be the only Bible that those kids ever know. It was humbling and inspiring. My co-counselors and counselors who worked at camp summers before or after me are some of my very best lifetime friends. Outside of camp, I was sporadically attending church during college and grad school years. Then in 1998, my husband and I found a home at the Episcopal Church of the Redeemer in Midlothian, Virginia, where we have worshiped ever since. I first recognized a call to ordained ministry in 2008 while volunteering at a junior-senior high summer conference. During the chaplain's homily, he began talking about serving God as an ordained priest, all that it involved, his joy in it, almost as if he were selling it or marketing it to us. And I'd never heard that before in a homily. And suddenly things around me became very dark and black, except for a small circle of light that seemed to come directly from his face to mine. I thought that maybe I was about to faint, but I didn't. The words of the homily felt like a message that was meant for me somehow, and I didn't understand it, but I felt like God was telling me something that I needed to explore. I felt inadequate, unworthy, and very confused. I prayed about it, but I mostly let it rest for a year, telling no one. The following summer, again serving the same youth conference, a different priest spontaneously shared with me her call story. And I discovered that she too had initially felt inadequate and confused. I realized then that we don't have to feel qualified to be a priest to be receiving a call to be a priest. When I returned home, I shared my sense of call with my husband and then met with my parish priest. And at that meeting, Father Steve confirmed the call with great certainty, and he was ready to form a parish committee and start the process. I was not expecting this immediacy, and I felt shaken off balance and not ready. I began serving as a lay Eucharistic minister, a lector. He had me deliver a sermon, lead some Lenten programs, and I continued serving the ministries that I loved in the church. Time passed, and I still didn't feel ready to pursue the call. For years, I struggled with feeling guilty about this. Am I saying no to God? Like, how selfish of me. But I could not imagine uprooting my 3 young daughters from friends and schools that they loved, or asking my husband to leave a growing business he founded where he had employees depending on him. Nor could I imagine living at seminary without my family. It just all felt impossible. Eventually, I confided all this in a priest friend who helped me realize that God would never be disappointed in my service as a lay minister, and that eventually, if it was meant to be, there would be a time when I could say nothing but yes to God's call to ordained ministry. And this gave me great peace and calm. So years go by. I raised my children, I'm working, I continue serving the church in ways I loved. And then in 2019, I had a meeting with my priest on a completely unrelated issue. And at the end of our meeting, the Reverend Robert unexpectedly shared his call story with me and then asked, "So does any of this sound familiar? Would you like to share with me your sense of call?" I was stunned. I shared my story and I asked him how he knew. And he said, "I've seen this in you from the very beginning of knowing you." And at that moment, I felt something physically throughout my body, like humming of energy everywhere. We talked further, and he offered to walk and talk and pray this path with me wherever it may lead. Without feeling any sense of pressure, I could say yes to that. Months go by, and then in the fall of 2019, I served as the assistant rector of a Curcio retreat where my mom was serving as the rector. And during that amazing weekend, multiple people, unaware of my call journey, individually approached me saying that I would make a wonderful priest. I was surprised. It seemed to come out of nowhere. At the same time, I was having many inner experiences of call, and it felt like God was hammering at me from the inside and the outside repeatedly with increased frequency. And suddenly I had this clear sense of, yes, God, it is time. I began the formal ordination exploration in October of 2019, and then COVID created a 2-year process fraught with stops and starts. This challenged me. I was finally ready. During this, there were times that God felt closer and further away. There were times that I felt a very strong certainty in my sense of call, and then a delay would happen or some other challenge, and it would feed my self-doubt. But at the same time, I knew God was in this with me, whether I could feel him there or not. I knew that God would lead me to where I was meant to be, in God's timing and not mine. I still, here at VTS, finishing my first year, don't have a really clear sense of exactly where God is calling me after seminary, chaplaincy or parish ministry, or some combination, or maybe something altogether different. But my call journey helped me learn that I don't have to have that answer right now, that I need to trust in God, and that I must simply remain open to the worship and education and practical experiences, amazing relationships, and God's presence here in my formation at VTS. And God will lead me to the door that I am meant to enter next. Thanks be to God.